I will start with this, and I'll try to finish it off. The topic that was given to me said that including espionage, but I have, said that espionage, which is as old as history of mankind, is not an end into itself. Ultimately, the work of espionage or the products of espionage have to be utilized in a very sensible manner, so that is what I will be concentrating on. Now, the fact is that we keep complaining about manipulation by world powers. Well, we need to expect that. It is part of animal and human worlds and is also assiduously practiced by nations. Playing victim, pointless complaining. We cannot change the attitude and doings of superior powers unless you have the economic heft and military power and the will to do so. My next point here is that we really need to look at Deng Xiaoping's hide and bide. It holds an important lesson. We really need to wait for our time and should not try to punch much above our weight against known formidable opponents. And lastly, strategic versus tactical. We really need to choose our battles carefully and wisely. Otherwise, we can win all the battles but eventually lose the war. We also need to take only calculated risks and avoid foolhardiness and bravado. Now, coming back to activities of Imperial Russia or USSR or Russia up to date. Now, they date back to the Great Game, the British Empire. They intensified during the Second World War, and post-1947, that is after independence, roughly from the time of 1950-53, they have been reasonably benign for India on account of various reasons. Now, in contrast, the USA has been very active. Post-1947, the navies of Britain, France, Germany, Japan, etc. were decimated, and USA emerged as the primary naval power with substantial global expeditionary capability, and it began filling up the vacuum left by the colonial empires. And with the USA's critical oil-bearing slocks passing below India, it began serious overtures to ask India to join the US-led Cold War camp. Now, at this juncture, post-partition India, you're well aware, was forged by integrating 562 principal states. We had a very small armed forces which we inherited. It was busy with many things. The USA, in turn, was pursuing its Cold War imperatives and seeking bases even in India, and to augment its expeditionary capability into the IOR and towards Africa and the Middle East, and its behavior was typically imperialistic power. So the incumbent leadership was focused on internal cohesion and consolidation, but yet in the Cold War-dominated bipolar world, nascent India required a powerful patron. So we opted for non-alignment and later leaned towards the USSR. Now, there was grand strategy and sense behind this. With no common land frontiers, a middling navy, no expeditionary capability worth the name, USSR could not impose a satellite status in India, while India could leverage the Cold War rivalry to extract that critical economic aid, military hardware, and technology, which we did from USSR. Now, USA perceived India's non-alignment towards the USSR as a grave danger, that if USSR got bases in India, or India began constructing a significant navy with Soviet help or began acting in concert with the USSR, it would threaten USA's maritime access through IOR. So first it tried to bribe us with offers of inclusion in the UN Security Council. First in 1950 and later in 1955, the year that India opted for a relationship with the USSR. However, this offer was neither free nor altruistic, but had a rider that only after you join our camp. But with India not falling victim to the plans, the USA opted for a defense and a massive alliance with Pakistan. Now, there were other events which were happening on Asia's southern rim astride this period. The British were leaving Singapore. The Indonesian independence movement was coming under Soviet influence. Egypt and the Suez Canal too seemed to be moving into the Soviet camp. So the USA at this stage began arming Pakistan with weapons for land and air warfare with two clear objectives. That is, enable Pakistan to pose a credible threat to India on land and air, force India to divert resources from naval construction, and instead focus solely on building ground and air forces. And our budgets of the first 55 years bears, signs of this being succumbing to this threat. So it was a good decision of not acquiescing to the US demand or succumbing to the bribe of the UNSC. Had we sided with the USA, perhaps India too would have been in the same situation that beset some of the countries which had opted to side with the USA in that area, for example, Iran or Pakistan. Now, there's been much debate in India over USA's offer of UNSC membership to India, and after India declined it, the PRC becoming the UNSC member. I thought it's perhaps good to clarify this. Now, when World War II ended, the allies that had fought alongside the USA, that is the KMT, PLA combined and USSR, the USA was already planning to trip them up. Now, as the Normandy invasion took place, it was very clear that the outlines of Cold War had begun. Now, Britain was exhausted. France was virtually out of the fight. The balance of force on the Eastern Front was in favor of the Soviets. It was evident that without USSR drawing away large chunks of the Wehrmacht, invasion of continental Europe was a no-go. Also, there were clear limits on how far the USA-UK invasion could advance from Normandy into Europe, and that parts of Europe would come under Soviet occupation. So the US's strategic concern was that if Soviets could occupy large parts of Europe, then by co-opting its technology, particularly of Germany and manpower, an enlarged Soviet Union, that is USSR plus parts of Europe, would pose a very substantial strategic challenge to the USA. So it began playing on the fears of Europeans who were petrified of Soviet occupation. And this is where the Bretton Woods Agreement of July 1944 came in, and where a new financial system was forged, and the USA agreed to rebuild Europe, take care of the foreign policy of the 44 different countries who participated in Bretton Woods, and take charge of their defense, and also laid the foundations for IMF, World Bank, and NATO. In August to October 1944, the Dumbarton Oaks Conference took place, in which four powers, that is ROC, Republic of China, or what we now call Taiwan, with the USA, UK, and USSR, worked out the draft charter of the IPSO. And ROC was made member of that. In 1949, the People's Republic of China was established, and IPSO membership was reaffirmed to ROC or Taiwan. In 1950-53, Korean War took place, 1954-55, and then in 1955, we saw the first and second Taiwan Strait crisis. In 1960, PRC-USSR relations worsened and began worsening even further. 1964, PRC conducted the first nuclear test. 1951 to 1971, active US efforts to disrupt, destabilize, and weaken PRC. 1951, it asked Dalai Lama or Lama Thondup to flee to India, and US President Dwight Eisenhower reoriented US covert activities to push against communism. And the secret 5412 Committee for Coordinating US Covert Operation included the Tibet program. Dalai Lama's elder brother was in touch with Washington. His other brother had close link to the CIA office in Kolkata. And by 1959, Dalai Lama had come to India along with tens of thousands of others. And the US operated Operation Street Circus under John Greene, deputy head of the CIA's Tibetan Task Force, who were collecting the what they call Egyptian fighters, which were made available by Gyala Thondup and his deputy. They were being trained at two camps and were being then airdropped from erstwhile East Pakistan and Mustom. Dalai Lama was also placed on the payroll of CIA, and with the CIA also providing the Dalai Lama administration a large amount of money. Now, July 1971, US NSA Kissinger visited PRC to seek support for ending the Vietnam War. It was followed by rapprochement with the People's Republic of China, October 25, 1971, the General Assembly approved Resolution 2578, replaced ROC with PRC in UN membership. And in November-December 1971, the PRC was recognized by the ILO, ICAO, FAO, IAEA, etc. In sum, from 1950 till 1971, if the USA had really wanted to induct India into the UNSC, it had all the time in the world, but it didn't do so. In contrast, just as the 1971 Indo-Pak War was building up, it inducted PRC into the UN Security Council. We are also aware of the Monroe Doctrine, how it started off with the sinking of the US Maine, the Spanish Wars, and how it expelled the European powers from the Greater Caribbean, annexed the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, and established control over the Greater Caribbean, which allowed the US Navy to emerge as the dominant maritime power in the Western Hemisphere. Incidentally, the People's Republic of China is now emulating USA and trying to do a Greater Caribbean in the South China and East China Sea. Now, after Second World War, the USA also operationalized what is known as Operation Paperclip. After Germany's surrender, US troops searching Europe were stunned by finds of German technology and weapons, and therefore Operation Paperclip under US Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency was commenced. It initially envisioned transporting 88 captured Nazi scientists to Kaunas, putting them to work on US projects, even though these scientists have helped design weapons facilities which killed many soldiers and civilians across Europe and USSR, and should rightly have been tried at Nuremberg. Unfortunately, the US government whitewashed past of their redesignated prisoners of peace and kept the secret even of the Justice Department Office of Special Investigation. Overall, it took out over 1,600 Nazi German scientists, engineers, technicians, dismantled, relocated entire plants, factories, and facilities, as also confiscated large amounts of German patents, copyrights, and trademarks. Now, it's good that India has been very careful about becoming a full-fledged strategic ally of the USA and not becoming its Ukraine against China. Now, post-World War II, the USA turned on its own allies, that is the USSR, the CCP National Party combined, but rebuilt Germany, Japan, the same Japan that it nuked twice. In 1948-49, USA recognized ROC. 51 to 71, we have already seen it tried its best to destabilize PRC. 71 to 72, it reached a rapprochement with the PRC with the help of Pakistan, transferred high-tech weapons directly and through UK to China, reportedly shared critical nuclear weapons technology with the PRC, abandoned ROC. 1953 helped overthrow the government of Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, and 1979 abandoned the Shah of Iran. 1979 invaded Afghanistan, funded the jihad, flew militants to Kaunas, trained them at CIA sites, indoctrinated them at the Al-Qifa Mosque, also known as the Brooklyn Jihad Center in Brooklyn, developed new books on militant Islam to radicalize them and distributed them. And after the USSR withdrew, it abandoned everyone who had participated along with it. 1991, the USSR broke up, promised not to advance NATO into the near abroad of Russia, but abandons Japan, Asia Pacific, decline of the Asian tiger economies. 1994, Chechen War supported by the USA. 9/11 again took support of both Russia and China. And 2003 onwards, attacks Iraq based on the so-called WMDs. CIA-sponsored color revolutions in Ukraine and Georgia. In 2010, it realized the strategic mistake of tying down entire might of its state in a small area between the Central Asia and Persian Gulf through two wars, that is Afghanistan and Iraq, which had led to the uninterrupted rise of PRC from 2001 to 2010. So in 2011, it intervened in Iraq, in Syria. The rise of AQI, ISI, ISIS is what we know. Fighting AQ in Afghanistan, allying with AQ affiliates in the Levant, utter chaos across West Asia. The grand strategy was disruption with balance of power, and then withdrew from Iraq. 2013, it starts to instigate Russia into a war using NATO membership for Ukraine as a cat's paw. And 2011, start of serious overtures to India and hints to assist it in downsizing China. PRC has been following the post-war model of Germany and Japan, and not the militarized models of pre-war Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, or USA. It has fought no serious war since 1979 and has been able to build an economy that's larger than USA's on PPP basis. USA, on the other hand, has been at war for 65% of the 20th century and 100% of this century, has spent over 10 trillion on these wars, including Homeland Department. Infrastructure is deteriorating, manufacturing is low, no longer the unique holder of critical technologies, in danger of losing its global preeminence, and hence averts to India. Studies indicate USA will not be able to prevail upon PRC in the Asia Pacific theater, primarily on account of two reasons: that China enjoys the home theater advantage and has also modernized its armed forces. Points to ponder. The USA has always struck down rising powers. If India becomes USA's Ukraine in downsizing China, would India, as the next rising power, be the next target? Perhaps with a USA-China alliance this time. Okay, we have a look at the new frontier of war and interventions in India's fault lines. The fact is that no country is perfect or fully stable, and hence we need to avoid exasperating fault lines. Very few nations have good relations with neighbors, so we should expect hostility and attempts by neighbors as others to exploit segments of our populace. It's a state responsibility to ensure segments of populace are not alienated or coherent political processes are undertaken to settle and end grievances, whether genuine or imagined. The RAND study of over 100 terrorist entities and insurgencies merits mention here. It shows that 43% of terrorist groups ended through political process, as most groups seek narrow policy goals. 40% ended through well-trained policing combined with intelligence services, because the local police and the local intelligence agencies, usually with permanent presence in affected zones, are better knit into the populace and have a better understanding of the threat environment. 10% ended because their goals were achieved, and only 7% were eradicated with the use of military force. There's something we need to take note of. Now, what is another problem with us? The main problem with us is that instead of seriously analyzing our fault lines and trying to address them, there is a propensity to glibly blame neighboring countries and adversarial powers, which in turn allows the powers that be within our country to evade any responsibility whatsoever for what's happening. We just blame a neighbor and says, not realizing brother will not turn upon brother until and unless there are grievous fault lines which encourage that event. We persist in aggravating those fault lines for electoral profit and petty outcomes. The quality of our populace and political leaders also needs a change. How much are we really spending on education? With change being exponential, are we really preparing our populace for the future? It's a case of 21st century kids being taught by 20th century adults using 19th century curriculum and techniques on 18th century calendar. And in our case, harking back all the time to the glory of 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 80,000 years. We are going forward with a neck pointing forward and not backwards. In sum, till we desist from and limit such actions which I mentioned in the problems, do expect every power, adversarial or friendly, to seize those events in order to manipulate us to its own ends. Now, to end, I would like to dwell upon 3 points. One, which was mentioned in the beginning, that General Bipin Rawat's June 2017 statement, India is prepared to fight a 2.5 wars, is perspicuous. It's neither original nor accurate representation of a military capability. Fighting two and a half front war. This term was first espoused by the USA, but starting from 2016, its various national security documents have started to cast doubts on this capability or construct. And this is an armed forces which enjoys an edge of at least 2 times over the nearest rival. And they say that they don't have a 2.5 or even a 2 front capability. Now, given various dimensions of modern warfare and proliferation technology, including dual-use technology, no country today has capability to successfully prosecute a 2 front war. It is not also original. This term is also not original because India has faced a multi-layered threat since 1959. Yet, after 3 full wars, 1 sectoral conflict, that is Kargil, the breakup of East and West Pakistan, many peace accords in the Northeast, in J&K, in Punjab, the end of the Cold War, and our nuclear weaponization, the original combo of threats continues to persist. We really need to think why, as no other major nation has continued to have the same combination of threats for 6 to 7 decades continuously. Now, is this a failure of diplomacy? Perhaps. War is not a pure military event, but is a politico-military affair. One main job of the political side is to ensure that all of the fronts are kept quiet when war is thrust upon us by one adversary. In 1962, the Nehru government reached out to USA and UK to lean on Pakistan to stay out. 1965, the Shastri government deliberately avoided opening a second front against East Pakistan, thereby not giving the Chinese an excuse to jump in. In 71, Indira government conducted an expansive, well-thought-out diplomatic campaign in the West and USSR to keep the USA and China out of the war. So the talk of 2.5 front is, in a way, tantamount to admission of failure of diplomacy. Now, insofar as capability assessment is concerned, we must look at the mindless reduction in logistic elements to increase teeth in our armed forces, particularly the army. We need to look at this point from the fact that most modern weapons have gargantuan needs of ammunition, fuel, etc., and all that. And here we are in the face of increasing needs, reducing the logistic element to increase teeth. During the 1991 Gulf War, 500,000 people supported roughly about 6,000 people who fired shots in anger. We have no understanding of that construct. The next is modernization for the sake of modernization. And lastly is the knee-jerk responses and processes that we have. Look at this fact that armed UAVs were being used extensively in our neighborhood from 2001 onwards by the USA. But it took the Armenia-Azerbaijan war of 2 years back to wake us to realities of modern warfare. And even that only shook, it's only the Russian-Ukraine war that has shaken us now to take action. So we really need to get a hold on what we really need. The second part of the second comment that I have is that there's an abject paucity of objective, dispassionate, bias-free evaluation or discussions on national security issues. Many of us come with our own biases, political or personal, etc. And that is why we have comic commando-style sets on TV, manufactured outrage and drama, shouting going on TV. We have people from the other side come over there, get insulted, they get paid, and they go back. Most so-called defense experts and think tanks are mere mouthpieces for political positions of either the ruling regime or the opposition. They don't know the difference between a urinal and an arsenal. So not knowing what really ails us, how do we administer these national security medicine? Now, such people are doing more damage to countries' national security than even terrorists. We need to build our leaders incrementally. Often tempting to think we are what we are today as a result of decisions of few exceptional leaders of today and some incompetent leaders of past. In reality, every country has geopolitical constraints on account of broad abstract forces of geographical location, demographic, resources, economic, military strength, etc., as well as core interests. No leader can afford to compromise on core interest. Yet, successive leaders will be beset by the same constraints and restrictions that their predecessors faced. Many leaders try to overcome those core grand strategy constraints, and when they fail, they blame their predecessors. Last point, we substantially need to improve our diplomacy. It's about dealing with other nations and not about appeasing domestic constituencies. Today, if you talk to people, many are happy to see our diplomacy become something like a Saas Bahu kind of squabbling, with smart or impertinent, sassy, abrasive responses being given to every event of criticism or unpleasant finding by a foreign nation. Worse, people who profess to be so-called intellectuals are now lauding such kind of diplomacy. I wonder if this is acceptable. With this, I end my talk, and I'll be happy